Good afternoon, everybody. How are you guys doing? Hope you're having a good Tuesday. We've got a little bit of Seahawks roster news, and it's nothing earth shattering, it's nothing shocking, but it's still worth going over. Today was the day where the Seahawks had to get down to 85 roster spots. We do have an exemption for an 86th with Donkor because of his, he's from the NFL Europe pipeline, but we had to trim down by a few players before this second preseason game against the Bears. So I'm going to go over it real quick. Again, there's nothing shocking here. The biggest thing that came out of this wave of cuts was not a cut. Wide receiver Cody Thompson, who had been mildly impressive in camp and showed up a little bit in the mock game, ended up on injured reserve with a shoulder injury he sustained Saturday versus Pittsburgh. So Cody Thompson, after this is kind of his thing, right? This was a great opportunity for him because so many of our starting receivers are not playing. So it's kind of too bad that he goes on IR now. He's not going to get a chance to play in the next two preseason games, and probably the next several games after that. Not that that was likely, but excuse me, it is kind of too bad that Cody ends up going out like this. So he was one of the people removed off the roster in effect, and it also makes a little more sense why we got our Arcega-Whiteside. So that's the main one. Other than that, we waived Josh Valentine Turner, who was the guy who missed the tackle on the game-winning touchdown by Pittsburgh. So I think we all kind of saw that one coming. Defensive tackle Antonio Valentino, who I wasn't even really familiar with. Guard Eric Wilson, and wide receiver Deontez Alexander. We also activated offensive tackle Liam Ryan from the PUP. He passed his physical. And speaking of past physicals, by the way, Arcega-Whiteside passed his clearly because he's actually practicing with the team today. So we have ourselves our 86-man roster because of the Donkor exemption. And by the way, of course, to my understanding, Donkor's roster exception will continue on into the regular season as long as he remains on the practice squad, which is quite likely. So that gets us down to the proper roster size for now. I don't think any of these guys had a great chance of making the team. Cody Thompson certainly had a chance to make the practice squad, but honestly, there are so many receivers on this team that I find to be at least a little interesting. I don't mind the fact that he gets cleared out of the way. Somebody was going to get cleared out of the way. It just ends up being him. But this isn't really the stuff that Seahawks fans are thinking about right now with good reason. Like this stuff's interesting, of course. It has an impact, but none of these guys had a real chance of making the 53-man. I think we all know that. If any of them made the 53-man, it probably would have been because the injuries in front of them were so disastrous that I mean nobody wants to see that, right? That's just bad. So this isn't the big thing right now. The big thing is this from training camp today. We had a little bit of a curveball. First full team snap with offense goes to Drew Lock. First time we've seen that in camp. Furthermore, other people reported that Drew Lock was taking snaps from Blythe early, and Geno was taking them from Kyle Fuller. So either this is just a one-day thing where they're letting Drew Lock cosplay as the starter for a day just to see what's up. Maybe they were planning on doing a rotation where Geno would start as the starter, Lock would get the starting job later in camp and after the first week of the preseason, and then they would look at both and say, hey, Geno looked better with the ones than Drew did, so Geno wins, or Lock looks better with the ones, so then Lock wins. This might be part of that process. Or they've decided to give the starting job to Drew Lock. Now, that's kind of hard for me to believe in light of what Carroll said after that first preseason game where he kind of made excuses for Geno's bad plays, and then he made a much bigger deal about Drew Lock's bad plays. It sounded to me like he was somebody who was trying to pump up Geno and talk down Drew, which kind of makes sense if you believe that he wants Geno to be the starter and is kind of already at least partially made up his mind, which I kind of feel like might be the case. But this indicates at least some degree of openness to the idea of Locke being the starter. So this is kind of the big news right now. This is the stuff that people are talking about. Drew Lock gets to go with the first team at the start of the day at camp. And if Drew Lock starts against the Bears, and let's say he does well, I don't know what well exactly would entail, but let's say we don't see the end of game mistakes he made at the Pittsburgh preseason game, maybe he can seize it for good now, because I know that some people think that Geno played better in that first preseason game, and maybe in some ways he did, but it seems to me that overall this offseason, Locke has been outplaying Geno, so maybe now is the time when the worm is turning. We're not going to know for another couple of days, but interesting nevertheless. Other than that, just a couple of quick things that I heard this morning that are obviously positive. Sidney Jones seems like he's back. Rashad Penny seems like he's back. If they're not all the way back, then they're very close. So if there was any concern about those guys having injuries, keep them out going into the regular season, I feel like that's probably that's pretty well knocked out at this point. I find it hard to believe they would be this close and then end up having to sit out another few weeks. So good chance you see both those guys, at least some in the preseason, this week. And honestly, they're both veterans, so if they don't, it's not the end of the world by any means. We both know we all know what those guys can do. Apparently, Kenneth Walker was not at camp, has not shown up on the VMAC field yet, or the Virginia Mason Athletic Center. So, don't know what's going on there. Obviously, he didn't play a lot against the Steelers. It does make you wonder if maybe a little something happened and they decided to be cautious. We'll find out more in the coming days. But, yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and just run down the interesting sequence of events. We are down to 86 players on the roster. I believe after this next preseason game, we get down to 81. And then after the last preseason game, we get all the way down to 54. And one of those 54 has to be specifically Donkor on the practice squad, or else it's 53. Yeah, so I'll be seeing you guys later. I'm probably going to be on Twitch tonight during the Mariners game. Probably going to do more Serious Sam 2. I'm most of the way through. So if that's something that interests you, or you just want to talk about Seahawks stuff, you can check in over there. We've been doing really well lately over there on Twitch, so I'm going to continue to try to build on that. And yeah, peace out. Go Hawks. Excited to see where this quarterback battle goes. I was a little discouraged after hearing what Pete had to say after that preseason game where he was kind of talking up Geno. It felt like he had already decided in his mind that Geno was better and he was going to say what he needed to say to justify that. But if Drew Lock is actually getting first team snaps today at the start, then that tells me the door is more open than I thought. So, see you guys later. Go Hawks. We'll see where it goes.